Elemental deserved so much better. A couple days ago, I saw Pixar's Elemental and walked out of the theater stunned from how good it was. The concept of it from the beginning looked cool to me from the get-go, but my expectations were blown out of the water with this movie, no pun intended. Despite this movie being so well done in my eyes, this film sadly earned a measly $11.8 million for its domestic opening day, which is apparently the lowest in Pixar history. So what exactly went wrong here for a movie that to me is much higher quality than a movie like Lightyear to do so poorly at the box office? I do want to give a bit of a spoiler warning here because some light to heavier spoilers will be covered in this video to help make my points clearer. So the biggest thing a good chunk of people have noticed with this movie was its issue with the marketing. Not so much the amount of marketing Pixar was doing, but rather what these trailers were actually showing. There's been that notion going around a lot these past few years, especially about how movie trailers show too much of a movie's plot to the point where the viewer of said trailer is able to make out the entire plot of the movie, even if it has a twist or something like that. Which I totally agree, that is an issue for certain movies in the marketing department. Elemental's case is very unique though, because I feel like I haven't seen anything like this before. They had multiple trailers for it, but somehow managed to show almost entirely fluff scenes in these trailers. Fluff in the sense that a lot of the clips from the trailers were either comedic gags or scenes that just didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Like Wade and Ember walking through that fence or Wade eating those hot coals screaming in pain. The comedy in the movie was fine, but for that to be such a big focus for these trailers was just not a smart decision in my opinion. I will give the trailers a little bit of credit for sort of covering one of the movie's biggest plot lines of Ember deciding whether or not to take over her father's store, but even then it was covered very briefly to the point where I can see why folks wouldn't find a premise like that super interesting on the surface. The actual movie makes this dilemma Ember is going through a lot more stressful, because her parents, especially her father, went through a lot of pain and struggle to get where they are. These people had their home destroyed by a storm, immigrated to Element City as a result of this home being destroyed. Bernie didn't even get to have a proper goodbye with his own parents because Bernie's father was worried that he was going to lose his sense of self out there, so he just like kind of disowned his son. Then when he and Cinder actually got to Element City, they seemed to be the first and only fire people actually living there now. This in particular was never flat out confirmed in the film, but there was context clues upon their arrival that made me think this was the case. Like the Grand Central Station area having paintings of the founding elements on the ceiling with fire being the only one not present. Then when they were looking around to rent a place, all the folks they ran into were non-fire folk, which leads into my next point. A good chunk of the other element people that Bernie and Cinder ran into were either afraid of them or just didn't like them solely because they were fire. The water people were especially bad. Like there was a scene where water kids were screwing around in the store and a flashback that felt very real in terms of a real life experience somebody could go through. At one point during Ember's childhood, she and her dad were going to see this special flower called the Vivisteria, which is a type of flower that can handle any kind of elemental being near it, fire included. Yet when they got to the entrance, a water person's security guard denied them access while showing a no fire people allowed sign, resulting in Bernie and the security guard getting into a screaming match in front of a young Ember before the two of them stormed off. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, Bernie was sick throughout most of the film, just coughing constantly. From what I assume to have been from overworking or old age maybe, none of this was even slightly shown in the trailers, and it's such a big part of the movie. I feel like they could have just shown a clip of this guy coughing while Ember was like narrating to herself about whether or not she wants to take over the shop or not. It's just like scene of him coughing or even just like a quick shot of him yelling with the security guard. This and the love story between Ember and Wade are the two biggest plot devices in this movie. So for the trailers to essentially not cover one of these is kind of insane to me. But as a quick side note, the Ember ex-Wade love story was very well done. Seeing Ember's whole outlook on life change and figuring out what she really wants to do with her life, all thanks to meeting a water guy of all people, worked very well. I think what made it hit so much more for me was Wade was a walking polar opposite of every other water person the Lumen family came into contact with, a very kind and optimistic individual who was always trying to look for the good in others. Even when Bernie was clearly giving him a hard time on purpose just because he's a water guy, Wade still gave him as much respect as he could, smiling all the way through. I think if I had to put a label on Wade, it would be Guardian Angel. Granted, I can see why people find this romance portion of the plot generic. The marketing in particular made it look as generic as possible. There were tons of people complimenting how good the movie looks visually from the trailers, but were hesitant about the romance aspect because they feel like it's been done dozens of times already. And to be fair, it kind of has. I guess personally, those kinds of romance stories don't really get too boring for me. I don't know if it's just the fact that they're aren't any actual human-like characters in this movie that makes it hit different, but it felt fine. It's one of those things where you can't really blame the average consumer for not going out of their way to spend money to see this in theaters, because if the trailers look unappealing to them, they're not going to want to see it. The average casual viewer isn't someone like me who spends way more time than I should on the internet and is going out of my way to support these animated projects in order for them to be taken more seriously as a medium. And that's fine. They shouldn't have to do that just to see a Pixar movie. The marketing team just needed to do a better job at showing what this movie was actually about. This is especially important for a brand new IP like Elemental. Something like the Mario movie, the Toy Story series, or Kung Fu Panda wouldn't need to worry as much about this in the present day because they have the seniority factor. Multiple movies under their belts that were all successful, or in the Mario movie's case, an entire game series that's almost as old as Nintendo itself. Kung Fu Panda 4 and Toy Story 5 could arguably get away with even worse marketing than what Elemental had, but would most likely still do better during the opening weekends than Elemental did because people already know what they're getting into. Granted, a movie like Elemental might not have plans for another installment anyway. Based on how it ended, I'm not sure how the story could continue. Regardless, even if it's a one and done thing, that doesn't mean the marketing deserves to be bad just because more installments aren't part of the creator's plan. It's a scary thought that the reality of Pixar releasing more standalone stories like Elemental could become a lot less frequent in the future if they continue to perform this badly in theaters. I don't want them to keep forcing just sequels and that's all we see in the future, man. Like, of course I love Toy Story as a series, but let's be real, does there really need to be a fifth one now, considering the way Toy Story 4 ended? It really feels like some of the most blatant milking I've seen in my life. What makes this whole situation even sadder is Peter Sohn, the director for this movie, used events from his own upbringing as inspiration for Elemental's story, his parents being immigrants too and making tons of sacrifices so Peter could have a better life. It's really cruddy to think this guy poured his heart and soul into this $200 million budget of a movie only for it to be currently sitting at 44 mil globally as of recording this video. At the end of the day, I'm not trying to force anyone or pressure anyone into seeing Elemental. I do encourage it for sure. I promise I'm not the only one who's seen it and was surprised at how much better it was compared to what the trailer showed off. Personally, it's definitely worth the watch if you're already a big Pixar movie fan or even an animated movie fan in general. The sad reality is the box office numbers probably won't see some dramatic increase or anything, but if it could at least earn back its budget during its theater run, that would be nice. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little rant of mine. Haven't really done a video like this before, let alone about a movie, since I typically focus on shows, but I might do more of these in the future. I just really wanted to talk about what was going on with this movie because it felt like such a unique and sad situation that I felt passionately about. Don't be a stranger to hitting the like button and subscribing for more content like this in the future though, but for now, I will see you guys next time. Peace out, take care, bye-bye.